And what it do? Welcome into the Three Dudes Fantasy Football Show. It is mock draft season. We have mock draft 1.0 on deck. Each of us drafted from a different position, 10-team PPR mock draft using the Fantasy Pros draft simulator. I think it's going to give us some really good ideas of how to deal with things over the next few weeks as training camps are upon us. And it's a great thing to do as you prepare for your fantasy football drafts. JJ Buck, Steven Masterson, Aaron Hernandez, Three Dudes Fantasy Football Show. Gentlemen, mock draft season is upon us. How did it feel to get a little bit of that itch, to scratch a little bit of that fantasy football bug going through the mock draft simulation?
Got to dust off some of the cobwebs and get back to riding on the bike and getting used to how it was. It was nice.
I don't know. I just know that this draft is not how a real draft is ever going to go. But for now, this is fabulous, and I loved it.
I don't know if you can say that. I think there's going to be a lot of changes this season. A lot of things you just think are going to be a certain way, and it turns out a different way because household names, might be pushed down a little bit. People might fall in love with zero running back. People might say, bleep you, I'm going on running back. I think this fantasy season, there's so much more out there that it is going to be a lot.
But you're going to have injuries and all. Like, there's the training camp injuries that are about to hit, right? Like,
yeah,
we know not everyone is going to be healthy that we drafted in this mock draft. So
that's why it's a mock draft.
Right, exactly. And somebody's going to get pushed way up because, running back X is out for the season, or Y, or, whoever it is. So, or we hear news on, hey, Nick Chubb's timetable moved up. So he'll move up in the rankings. Like, something's going to happen where this is awesome. And it does give us a kind of a idea of where
if you fall in love with Nick Chubb and you take him high in the draft, that is your losing fantasy.
I mean, he looks like a man. So
yeah, we are insane when it comes to sports, thinking that everyone's going to be able to come back just like that from these injuries. But we'll see, because there's, we've talked about it so much with the quarterbacks, Aaron Rodgers, Kirk Cousins, but Nick Chubb is in that area. If he comes back soon, how much work is he going to get, etc. But you're right. That's what we will watch training camp for. But this was a really good exercise, to start figuring out what you want to do. And what we did is each drafted from a different area. Steve drafted number 1 overall. I drafted from number 5. Aaron drafted from number 10. And I think it's going to allow you to kind of get a really good perspective of the different ways that you can attack the mock draft. And it's not a surprise when we've been talking number 1 overall pick and Steve took CeeDee Lamb. Now, I do want to ask you, you mentioned training camp. Things change and injuries are going to happen. CeeDee Lamb not showing up to training camp. If he does not show up to training camp, but does play week 1, does that change who you would take number 1 overall?
A little bit, but you don't see holdouts anymore because the CBA agreement fines them and they can't get that money back. So we might see CeeDee Lamb hold in where he shows up but doesn't participate. I could see me making that change to Tyreek Hill, but what I did is what we talked about in last show. I wanted to see what my team would look like if I took a wide receiver 1 and let the rest fall where it may, right? So I didn't want to do the normal of taking Christian McCaffrey because I wanted to have a stud. So I did take CeeDee Lamb, but I still, even if, let's say he does hold out, I would still take a receiver right now, and I would just move it to Tyreek Hill.
Is the decision to go CeeDee Lamb over Tyreek Hill for you at number 1 in this mock, was that because you wanted Waddle? Like, you knew that you wanted Waddle stock, and did that kind of affect why you went CD over Tyreek?
No, it didn't affect it too much. But if I took Tyreek, I wouldn't take Waddle, right? Because I don't want to take 2 pass catchers on one team. I actually think CeeDee Lamb has the bigger upside this year, just because he's a little younger. But I don't think there's a massive difference. I mean, CeeDee Lamb was wide receiver 1 last year. I think he could do it again. And I don't think Tyreek Hill could be that far off. I just don't know if they're going to be pushing for 2,000 yards, and I think Jalen Waddle could have a bigger impact on Tyreek Hill, which is the only reason Tyreek Hill is my number 2 wide receiver and not number 1. I think Jalen Waddle will have an impact on Tyreek.
Yeah, I will say, looking at your draft and what you did is you went elite wide receiver 1. You came back, locked in your RB1 in the second round, and I think your draft felt really nicely. How did you feel overall going through the mock and knowing that you were going to take that elite wide receiver number 1 overall?
I actually love how it panned out because it's what we're talking about. Saquon was sitting there, but so was Derrick Henry, and so I kind of sat there and debated both, but I would have been happy with either. And then on that turn, being able to take Jalen Waddle, I loved it, right? Because I see Jalen Waddle as a top 12 wide receiver in my rankings this season. So I ended up with 2 of my top 12 wide receivers, a top 5 running back for me. And then to be able to come back and grab a Cooper Kupp who's a little older, but in the 4th round, I still think he has high upside. I loved that how it started. I loved getting 3 top pass catchers and a great running back who I think has top 5 potential, with the potential of being number 1 running back.
Yeah, I like how it played out because you had solid floors. I think with Cooper Kupp and Keenan Allen, you're looking at interchangeable wide receiver 3s, a potential starting flex player for you there, and then upside with your other receivers, with Christian Watson, Rashid Shaheed, Jahan Dotson. So you have yourself a stable floor. And then the running backs, I think, are really interesting. I'm big on Josh Jacobs, but then I love the Tony Pollard and then Nick Chubb. And I know we were kind of joking on Nick Chubb a little bit, but when he comes back, you're looking at, you have 2 good starting running backs. Tony Pollard, maybe he does have a 60-40 share over Tajay Spears. Who knows? So I think playing that card when you have 2 starting running backs is really good with the upside of Nick Chubb. And then you got a really fantastic handcuff in Blake Corum, because we've seen Sean McVay's offense. He'll lean into a guy and someone gets hot. And if Williams goes down, and he has missed some time over the last few years, and we've seen that Blake Corum coming from Michigan, Harbaugh ran the football a ton, they won a national championship, that he can step into a solid role.
Yeah, so I loved the Blake Corum pick purely because he is one of those players, once you get a little bit later, he has potential to win a league, which is what I'm looking for, right? So I don't mind sitting on Blake Corum's. I think Tony Pollard could be good. Nick Chubb, if he comes back this season, even if he sits out 8 to 9 weeks, I'm hoping this team is good enough to make a playoff push, which was the whole reason once I got to those middle rounds, taking bigger risks. But I did stay like a little safer in my top 7, right? So hey, I'm going to hit guys low floors, hopefully have high ceilings. I mean, I think CD Lamb has a low floor, but a huge high ceiling. I always mix that up, right?
A high
I always
floor.
say that, a high floor with a huge ceiling. So it's a high floor. Saquon Barkley, I believe, has a high floor. Again, high ceiling. Jalen Waddle, same thing. We've seen it from Jalen Waddle. We've seen it from Cooper Kupp. So that's what I was going for. And, my surprise pick that I actually really like is Shaheed because of the kickoff rule changes this year. And if your team, if your league is playing in like we play in, where you have kickoff return points, the rule states they have to kick it off and it can't go into the end zone. Otherwise, the team's getting it, I think, at the 35. You're going to see more kickoffs, I think, return this year. And
that's the whole point of the new rule.
Right. And knowing that
kickoff returns.
Knowing that he's the returner and a wide receiver 3 on their team, I like the upside there. So he's kind of, that's where paying attention to your league rules. And the reason I drafted him is just to bring up that rule. So when we talked about it on the podcast, hey, this is something you think about, like know your rules, know if they're doing kickoff returns, know that there's a change this year.
And I know one of the things you're going to see, it's a theme when we talk about all of our mock drafts, is we are definitely team weight on quarterbacks. And Tua and Herbert. So 12th round and 15th round for you, and I think that you have that connection, Tua and Waddle, so you get a little bit of that stacking combo. But it was evident that waiting on quarterback is the way to go this year.
Well, Jordan Love was sitting there in the 11th round. And so I really wanted to see what this team would look like if I didn't take a quarterback till round 12. That was, again, it's a mock draft. The whole point of this is to see what the team looks like. So Jordan Love sitting there 11th, I really debated it. And I would have normally in a draft taken Jordan Love there. But I waited. and then Jordan Love was off the board. And since every team had a quarterback and one team had a backup, I was like, most likely I should be able to get Brock Purdy and Tua. Now, again, another team took Brock Purdy, so I just took Tua in the 12th round and said, okay, that's fine. And then just took a flyer on Justin Herbert. Justin Herbert, we drafted as a top 5 quarterback last year. Who knows? I don't think he's going to be good because he doesn't have a lot of weapons. But at the same time, we also didn't think he'd be good his rookie season. So my last pick, who cares? It's a pick I don't mind throwing away on a chance. And
Yeah.
and I can cycle quarterbacks.
Yeah, and
Tua
it
is
becomes
gonna start hot.
Yeah, it becomes a movable roster spot.
Yeah.
And that's a challenge too when you're drafting, is understanding, like, you want to wait, but then you're going to have to attack some positions early. So if you maybe draft one too many wide receivers, or you go a little bit deeper, you do have to keep in the back of your mind, those guys, figure out who you're willing to cut and chase, because someone's going to go off early. And we saw it last year, whether with Puka Nacua and everything along those lines. But it is, hey, if you want to double up on quarterback just because you're unsure, I think that's fine, because that can become kind of a movable roster spot for you. But Aaron, when you're looking at what Steve was able to do from the number 1 overall selection going wide receiver, what do you think?
Number 1 it's tough. I honestly feel like number 1 and the last pick is a tough spot to be in. I always hate being one of those. Steve did do well. I liked his running backs, the way he drafted, and I think in my mock Tua was in the 12th round, and then he had picked up Herbert, and it's like, that's great. It's like I kind of did like the same thing. I might have taken Jordan Love a little bit earlier in mine, but I still ended up with Brock Purdy as like my last pick, which probably wouldn't happen. But Steve was also, like, I think we talked about Mark Andrews in the 7th round is kind of insane. But otherwise, I like Steve going wide receiver. He picked Saquon, which is great. He got his running back, like you said, but he's got a lot of upside there, and he's got a lot of value. Like, I almost went with Shaheed too for that exact reason, but I tried to draft a little bit different.
Yeah, the one thing I
that.
look at, and I think, Kupp, it is, I think we're going to see a solid floor, as Steve has been discussing, kind of coming back full season healthy. Stafford's still going to involve him in that offense because it's still, 2-target dominant offense with Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp. With Keenan Allen, it'll be interesting to see how Caleb Williams does, who does he hone in on, because we know Keenan Allen can be that guy where it would be easy for Caleb to look with him on the routes, feed him. How do you feel? Because I guess the one you'd go down and say Christian Watson. That's kind of your 50-50, because CeeDee Lamb can have those big games. You're big on Jalen Waddle, so I know you feel good, but do you like the potential explosiveness of your wide receivers? Because we know, those can change weekends, having those crazy games from wide receivers.
So I did a little bit of, CeeDee Lamb is pretty, like I said, he's got that high floor, right? So I know I'm going to get 12 points from CeeDee Lamb every week. Most likely, I'm probably going to get 15 to 20. Like, that's just who CeeDee Lamb is.
Yeah, he's a lot.
Jalen Waddle, the reason I like him so much is we've seen what he can be 2 seasons ago, and we saw last season as a hurt what he was, right? Last season, he was a wide receiver 3. But I think that was more due to injury than his actual play. So I think even though Jalen Waddle last season was hurt, he still was averaging 12 points or 10 points a game with 25-point potential. And I love that. That's also, though, why I went Cooper Kupp, right? Go safe. Keenan Allen and Cooper Kupp are purely there to offset Jalen Waddle.
Yeah.
Jalen Waddle has a dud, gets me 4 points. Cooper Kupp got me 12. CeeDee Lamb should be able to make up for that, and so did Saquon Barkley. I also love Christian Watson. He's the most targeted red zone threat on Green Bay when he's played. He's injury prone, but he's the most red zone. He gets the most red zone targets. So when he's in, if he stays healthy this season, he could be a boom. But if he stays healthy is the reason you're getting him so late. So I did exactly what I wanted to in like high floors for my first 2 picks, right? Because I think Saquon has a high floor, CD has a high floor. I believe Jalen Waddle has a high floor and a massive ceiling, but just to make sure I'm safe there, I still took Cooper Kupp and I still took Keenan Allen. Those guys are guaranteed they're going to get me 10 points. Like bad week or not, they're 10-point players. And maybe Cooper Kupp's no longer a 30-point player, but I know he's going to get me 10. He'll probably get me 15 most weeks. And he doesn't usually get less than that because he's going to get 9 targets a game. Even injured last season, he got 9 targets a game. So I expect the same. And Keenan Allen, I just think Caleb Williams will lean on him. That could be I might shoot myself in the foot there, but he's Keenan Allen. He
it's the
averaged
veteran.
the most. He was the highest averaging player points per game until he got hurt. So, he had like 2 50-point games, which throws it off a little bit, but he had 2 50-point games. Like he still has it. So,
and Caleb Williams is in a good enough situation going in that offense with those weapons that I know people are going to have CJ Stroud expectations for Caleb Williams, but I think even if you take a couple steps off that, that's still a really good rookie season for Caleb Williams. And I think the way that you went for it, not going running back at number 1 overall in a PPR league, definitely has to be on the table. I think people need to think about that if you have the number 1 overall pick, because I know it's easy to just lock in Christian McCaffrey, but the way running back is kind of shaking out right now, it is really interesting. So, all right, it is time.
Real quick, if I did go running back, I think I still go Saquon and then try to just load up on wide receivers. So I'd probably still go Jalen and Cooper Kupp, but I don't like my wide receivers as much. But I would have leaned in a little bit heavier into the running backs and just said, I'm going to be the best at running back and I will figure out my wide receivers.
That's interesting. Like saying Zig and Zag, be ready to go. So Steve drafted number 1 overall. I went number 5 overall in the fantasy mock draft that I did. And you can see, I kind of held serve with things we've been discussing. I went away from running back. I drafted 3 wide receivers. And so there's a bunch of man crushes in there. Of course, Steve has been talking up Jalen Waddle. I was able to get him in the 3rd round. I'm right there with Aaron and Devontae Adams in the 2nd round. Amon-Ra St. Brown at 5. That's going to be such an interesting area because you are going to have potentially Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson were like no-brainers before. But to me, I think Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jared Goff, that offense, the amount of games that they play in a dome, I'm happy with Amon-Ra St. Brown there. And then I wanted to attack kind of an RB1 to lean into in the 4th round, so Karen Williams. And then my man crush pass catcher, Dalton Kincaid, in the 5th round. I think that this is how I'm going to draft is receivers, running back, tight end, and have at least my RB1 locked in, my tight end locked in around 5. And then as we move on, James Conner, another man crush of the show, that Steve was talking about, getting him in the 8th round. I love that value there. The one thing I would change is I might go back-to-back running back after James Conner. As it played out, I liked Keon Coleman, Jacoby Myers, Romeo Doubs, but I did not like not having one more bite of at least an RB2 apple. So I think going through this process, I would come right back with another running back for James Conner because I liked the potential receiver depth I got with Coleman, Myers, and Doubs. Don't like the fact that I was just left with J.K. Dobbins late, coming off the Achilles in the offense for the Chargers. So I think if I were to change anything, I'd go one more running back after already having 5 wide receivers on my roster. But you guys, you know me, I'm so wide receiver in love, so wide receiver heavy. But I did like how it played out, the depth at wide receiver where you can get, really good flex play potential, Terry McLaurin, Chris Godwin, being able to get James Conner. But I would like at least one more running back on my roster.
I think if I were you, I love this team.
Oh, yeah, me too.
But I might trade out, let's say, like you said, one of your running backs. I might trade out 2, like get rid of J.K. Dobbins and just try to backfill Kyron Williams and James Conner because take Trey Benson and Blake Corum.
Yeah, but that would potentially have to be over Coleman or Myers.
Right. You're right.
They were not there at the Dobbins spot.
Yeah.
Right. You're 100% right. But at the same time, like you have 6 wide receivers before you got to Keon Coleman, Jacoby Myers, and Dobbs, and you have 2 injury-prone running backs. But I love the team. Like I love all those players. So James Conner has been my man crush. I think I would have just wanted to get one more, like you said, one more running back.
Yeah, and I think that's what if you wait on running backs, you got to make sure to get a few more bites of the apple. I didn't. It's just kind of the way I draft. I get wide receiver happy and heavy, but I also, waited round 10. Another one of our players that we talk about all the time, Jordan Love, comfortable there, and it just shows you that waiting on quarterback, man, do it, build up in the other places. But I'm with you. I love that my pass catching upside, but I think that's the balance, right? We all want to have perfect teams, and that's not going to happen. And so it's kind of how do you, though, protect yourself if you lean a certain way. And I think what you said, Steve, was right, is if you're going that wide receiver heavy early, then you have to take more running backs at the back end. And this is why I like this, because going through it, I take a step back and go, all right, I can adjust my rankings, adjust my expectations with building a team this way, going, wide receiver heavy in the first 3 rounds.
It's why we do mocks, though, right? We try things that maybe we wouldn't normally try.
Practice. It's reps.
No, but overall, like when Chris Godwin is your 5th wide receiver,
it's insane.
Yeah, I love the team, right? And I actually think Kyron Williams this season has huge potential, and I believe James Conner does too. So I love that team. This is what I would be trying to draft, and I 100% agree with you. We're complaining about your last 5 picks in a draft, where most likely you're going to cut them anyways. Yeah. Who cares? Like
that's what we were just discussing. Being open. Those are players that you have to be willing to move off of, jump on the waiver wire if there is a big week 1 or 2 injury, someone pops off, having the ability to move on. But even so, I think like right after James Conner, if I just took any other running back, I would feel more comfortable starting the season, and then whoever, if it was Dubs or Dobbins that I needed to move off of, and it would be fine off that spot. But Aaron, you mentioned it, kind of drafting 1 or 10 can be challenging. I do like kind of that mid round. I think there's a lot of things available in each, and drafting at number 5, it left me with a lot of our man crushes, which I really like. Players that have high upside, and being in the middle of the draft, it's a comfortable place to be in.
It always is. That's usually my favorite spot. There's not too much pressure. It's like having the first pick and your first couple of picks, and then being at the end, you kind of have that anxiety, like who's going to be there for my pick. So it's always like, all right, well let's see how this shakes down. So yeah.
Well, and then from the first spot, you're kind of sitting, you're doing the exact same thing. You're getting the best player in the draft, but then you're waiting 20 picks.
Yep.
Right. So like where in the middle of the draft, you're getting probably top 5. Most likely you're going to get one of your top 5 guys, and then you're still going to get potential into the first, but high end second round player, where at the end, the first overall pick, you're getting 3rd round talent. Or at the end of the second, or you have that first, second swing, you have 2 really good players, and then you're waiting 20 picks until your 3rd round pick.
Yep, those snake drafts are fun. There is a league that I play in, that we draft in person, and it's just straight up, every round is the same, and it's a good way. I like that, but I don't know if you guys are, really into, straight up every round's the same order. It's something I like.
I think that's a fun of fantasy, is the different tweaks about the different leagues you're in. Of course, we just kept a basic 10-team PPR snake draft for our fantasy mock drafts for this episode, and I think that's fun when you do have those different things, and we all kind of know the different tendencies of our leagues. And just doing this exercise, though, that kind of round 8 to 10 is where I really realized that if you go, I guess you consider it 0 running back, if not taking one to the 4th round, that's when you need to get your depth. And looking at like what you did, Steve, kind of finding Tony Pollard, Nick Chubb in there, if you go 0 running back, that's the trend you need to jump on. Just give yourself a little bit more depth because you don't know when that waiver wire person is going to be. It could be week 1, it could be week 5, and maybe the dude you draft in the 9th or 10th round becomes that guy. And so I think if you feel really confident about your starting lineup, that's a really good place to kind of attack some of the RB2 depth. I think this is what we're going to see this year.
Yeah, I mean, if James Conner was sitting there when I took Tony Pollard, I would have taken James Conner. But taking a Tony Pollard or any of those guys, that's where you start to. I mean, that's where your league can be won because you're stealing value. And there's always some player in that 8th, 9th, 10th round that is going to go off. You just hope you hit him.
Oh, absolutely. I even think I kind of did that with Rashad White last year. It was kind of in that area, and he turned out, he wasn't the most efficient running back, but he was still putting up points. And
he had
a
really good season.
Yes, it was a great season. So, if you're able to do something like that, it'll help carry you for your.
It was the 4th highest scoring running back last year. That's efficient to me.
Yeah.
Well, and Raheem Mostert went in most drafts in the 12th or 13th round. Like
way out there. Yeah.
There's going to be a player like that every year. I mean, Puka wasn't drafted, right? I mean,
that's the
a
other
little different, but
thing. Waivers. The other thing after the first week, some leagues, if somebody doesn't like what they're expecting with that player, you'll end up seeing them on waivers. It's kind of crazy in some leagues.
But I'm changing my strategy a little bit.
I'm guilty of that. I'm guilty of that.
It happens. Like, oh, it looks awful. They didn't play. They only played like 5 snaps this game, and then it's like it turns out, the rest of the season they're in there. So,
but on the other point of that is last season I missed out on Puka Nacua and Kyron because I didn't want to put a big bid in the beginning first week or two, and nobody really comes up after that. Right? Like I spent a huge amount of money on Jerome Ford, who was okay, but he wasn't Kyron Williams, he wasn't Puka. So my strategy is changing a little bit this year, where the first 2 weeks I plan to not have much fab after week 2.
These chips all in.
Yeah, because those are where we find players. Like, and so kind of have to. That's why I believe what JJ's saying. You have to have at least 1 or 2 players you don't mind cutting.
Yeah,
which is weird. Like, why are you drafting somebody you don't?
I mean, there's times where it's hard. It's like that. I don't really want to drop this guy.
Just be like JJ and draft a kicker, or don't draft a kicker and figure it out.
When we used to have kickers in our league, and I'd just not draft one, and then wait till week 1 and be like, oh, who am I going to cut? But that's the fun of it is we all have different strategies and different ways to view it, and that's why I really like what we did in this mock draft exercise, each kind of drafting from a different place. And then Aaron had the awesome advantage of drafting from the 10th pick in our mock draft. And Aaron went wide receiver heavy. AJ Brown, Puka Nacua, Brandon Ayuk, your top 3. Then you backed it up with Joe Mixon, Raheem Mostert. And then the crazy thing is if you get Jalen Waddle right there,
he was still there. I honestly didn't expect it, but he was on the board on this mock. So I'm like, all right, I have to.
What league you're in, what happens. How did you feel about what you were able to put together drafting from the 10th pick?
Yeah, it was definitely fun. Coming back, back-to-back picks, those rounds. It still was tough. Because there was players like, for instance, like Puka, like you took Devontae Adams. It's like I went with Puka. I think Devontae went after this, and it's like I went with maybe the safer of the two. I think I was like, I don't know if you've seen any of the rumors between San Francisco, Las Vegas.
Well,
Ayuk, Adams, stuff like that.
But yeah, that's going to be interesting because the Adams stuff, his agents try to shoot that down this week, saying there's no truth to it. Aaron Rodgers can talk all he wants, but Adams hasn't requested a trade. They're not seeking a trade at this moment in time. The Brandon Ayuk one, it's similar to CeeDee Lamb, but I think we trust CeeDee Lamb a lot more. Ayuk is going into the final year of his contract, and he wants to be paid right now. And San Francisco is saying we are not paying you right now, so he's like, trade me. And San Francisco's like, we're not going to trade you. So that's the player that you wait. And if you like the upside, you take him in the third round.
Yeah, that's what I did. I was nervous, but looking at the players that were there, I was like, I'll roll with Ayuk. I was like, I happened to get Waddle that late, so it's like, anything
that
happens,
changes
that's
everything.
fine. So
Yeah.
Doesn't happens with Brandon Ayuk there. But the one question I did have for you,
Hmm.
is going Raheem Mostert. And yeah, I think he had a career year last year. But are you worried that the value of Mostert in the 5th round might not be there if Devon Achane is more of that workhorse
getting
on the field?
some of the work getting handed off. Yes, that is something I'm definitely nervous about, and that was one thing I did struggle with in this. It seemed the way the rounds broke down that I could not get a running back that I was comfortable with. So I took Mostert because he's going to get the ball. It may change. It's a crowded backfield, but he was the man last year. So I'm like, well, we'll see where it goes. There's some depth that I had at wide receiver, but Keaton Mitchell coming off the injury, it's not really anything that's useful. It's kind of like a sit and wait, kind of see where it lands. So it was something that was, tough for me.
Is that what you notice is drafting from 10? It wasn't quite the same running back depth as we were getting. From
Yeah. So basically, I missed out on every running back. So coming back through,
because I like what you did. After you get Jordan Love, you get Evan Ingram, who
I
has
love Evan Ingram.
top 5 tight end potential, but the upside of your wide receivers after that, and the back end of getting Xavier Worthy in a good offense, Brian Thomas Jr. maybe not a high ceiling as the other guys, but then you have Brandon Cooks.
Mm-hmm.
And Cooks is a good flex bye-week wide receiver.
Absolutely.
At the back end. So would you maybe think about, if you were drafting from 10, going a running back in the 3rd round?
Yes. Okay. Yes, because that would have been Josh Jacobs. So Achane was still there, Pacheco, and let's see, Achane, Pacheco. I'm looking at this.
Because are you saying like going wide receiver, and then going like Mixon and one of the guys he just mentioned?
Because that feels like that could be a good strategy from the back end.
Yeah, I agree.
You're able to get 2 big-time wide receivers because you're going to get those back-to-back picks, but then also get yourself a good chunk of the running backs, and then that gives you a lot of kind of leeway to just kind of pick off what balls.
Well, I was going to ask that same question, but maybe on the 1-2 turn, right? Grab AJ Brown, and I'm not sure who you still had available when you were picking there.
So there was Etienne, Gibbs, and Kyron.
So let's just say you grab AJ Brown and Gibbs, right? And then you still go Ayuk and Mixon. And then, I mean, in this scenario, you got Waddle. So your 3rd wide receiver would be Waddle, but it'd be Ayuk, AJ Brown, Waddle, Gibbs, and Mixon would be your 3 wide receivers instead of.
Right. Yeah, and I'm trying
it's just like, as I look at that draft, I love what you did because I love all those players, but I also understand exactly what JJ's saying, where maybe at the back end of the draft, I'm gonna take one of those running backs so I don't end up with Mixon, Mostert as my starting 2.
Right. Then so looking at like what was available late round 2 is even stuff that I missed out on by how it snaked. So it's like literally the worst case scenario. So like I missed out on like Jerome Ford, who would have been, there for most of the season for the Browns. So I couldn't, they all went before I could. Ezekiel Elliott was someone I would have taken too. Even then, Tajay Spears went. So it's like, if I didn't take that, early running back, it ended up, kind of definitely hurting me on that back end. But looking at wide receivers, there were plenty of wide receivers late round. So that was something that,
because it kind of feels like from the first part you want to take receivers because you want to get one of the elite ones, but in the back end, the running backs dry up in that second, third round swing before you draft again.
Yeah, and I even tried to find like that late round, and it just the way this turned out, it's like I was able to get Waddle late, but everything else turned out to go before I could get it. So
we know that Waddle pick in most drafts is not going to be there, but
no.
still,
and
it's
not in any draft with me.
Not any draft
I
with
know.
Steve that we're in the league.
No, and
But what I think this is really good because I think doing this and seeing the way you guys drafted and then seeing how the teams played out, it makes me think that when we talk so much about certain strategies, zero running back or go all in here, I really where you pick in the draft should dictate your strategy. Like if you, because I would be completely different. Looking at how Aaron drafted and then seeing what was there, as I couldn't be that draft 3 wide receivers as I was in the back end. I'd rather have 2 good ones and then 2 running backs and then fill my holes there. Whereas, drafting from the top, even at number 5, I felt a lot better waiting on running backs. And it's really interesting to see just how much of a shift that is based on the spots of where you're picking from. So I think that definitely, I like to joke and say I'm all in on wide receivers, but if I end up having the 9th or 10th pick, that's changing my draft strategy.
It definitely has to.
I think you can also say like each one of our lobbies might have been a little different. Aaron's lobby was definitely running back heavy, where our lobbies were more wide receiver heavy, right? We weren't getting Jalen Waddle in the 4th, 5th, 6th round, but Kyron Williams was still sitting there for you in the 4th.
Mm-hmm.
And that wasn't there for Aaron. And probably Josh Jacobs wasn't sitting there either. So
no.
Lobbies, I mean, your draft room can dictate that too. So if you go draft your 2 receivers and then you start seeing a run on running back, then you need to be aware of that. But if you don't see it, then you can be aware of that as well.
Yeah, you're going to have to adjust to what happens in your league. And we understand that there's certain players in each of our leagues we know are going to draft someone. We obviously are listening to each other because we have a lot of the same players on the teams in our mock draft. Going Jordan Love. I know you went with him in the 7th round as we waited on quarterbacks. What made you want to pull the trigger there?
My reach, yeah. It was just based off I'm gonna go get my quarterback I believe in, and there wasn't anything like running backs, anything that it's worth taking. So I'm like, I'm gonna take my quarterback then and roll with it.
It still worked out. Like the way it played out, and then you're able to get Evan Ingram, who's legit be a starting tight end this year in 10-team leagues, no doubt about it. Followed up with some high upside picks. I think Calvin Ridley and Xavier Worthy are really good. I think Romeo Doubs, getting him late in drafts, because he's the one thing you can trust in Green Bay. Yeah, Christian Watson, if he's healthy, he's going to dominate. As Steve said, drop in the red zone target number. Wicks, Reed, there's guys there, but Doubs has been the consistent. And I like kind of his safety net late in drafts.
Exactly.
Because we know that offense is going to be explosive. Jordan Love, the second half of the season, showed you he can have multiple targets, keep them happy. I think, Romeo Doubs is one of those guys late in drafts that I want on my roster because I'm good kind of sitting and waiting to see if something else happens.
Well, and you had Jordan Love, so it's a good pairing.
Mm-hmm.
No, I really loved your Evan Ingram pick. I think to JJ and I both took tight ends way earlier, but I would be ecstatic if I got Evan Ingram in the 9th round. Like I thought that's a steal.
I was definitely happy where he landed in that round on my team. It's like PPR wise, I was like, that guy's pretty solid. So, once he scores touchdowns, he's a fantastic tight end. So,
and I love what you did because I'm big on taking some chances on rookie wide receivers. In the mock draft, I only got Keon Coleman in his spot, but Xavier Worthy and Brian Thomas Jr. because Thomas Jr. is a 1st round pick. The Jaguars took him in the 1st round. I know that Christian Kirk is there and he's established in the playmaker for the Jaguars. They brought over Gabe Davis. You have Evan Ingram. So the target tree, it's busy in Jacksonville, but I still like investing in a first round pick in the double-digit rounds of fantasy football. I like that strategy with what you did with Worthy and Thomas there.
Yeah, I definitely like the Worthy pick there. Thomas was kind of a little bit of a homer pick, but it was more to see, like, let's just see where it goes. I was like, I'm curious how Jacksonville's going to turn out on a pass catching, the passing game. Who's really going to be the one to lead the way? Is it going to be Christian Kirk again? Is he recovered from his injuries? Is Evan Ingram going to lead the way like, the second half of last season? And then, now you have Gabe Davis and Thomas there. So we'll see.
I also love it because, excuse me, we play in a keeper league. Taking those rookies, like, you never know who's going to be the next, Jamar Chase or Justin Jefferson. So, especially if you play in a league like ours, I love those picks.
Yeah, and really too on this 10th pick spot is I kind of tried to draft, similar to my strategy last year from that, and it's not really something that's feasible. I was hoping I'd be able to, get more running back, value somewhere, but I it's not going to be there. So
no, I think I'm really enjoying going over these mock drafts because it's opened some doors in my brain about things I wasn't thinking about, especially when it comes to draft strategy. And so let's go back to Steve in this number one pick in our 10-team PPR mock draft. And we each were in different lobbies, so we weren't drafting against each other in this exercise. But when you look at Steve's draft here, do you have a favorite pick? I'm going to ask Aaron, and then I'm going to give mine, and then we'll get Steve's first. But when you look at what Steve was able to draft, is there a favorite pick of just valuing round that he was able to get from drafting from the number one spot?
Of course, it's CeeDee Lamb, but there is one pick, and Steve brought it up because I play in a lot of return yardage, and it's Shaheed. I was like, Shaheed returning kicks and being on the Saints and doing what he has done, something that late, it will probably, if you're in a return, league, he will have points. And it's something that's really late round, but Steve did kill it with his Barkley and Jacobs, Keenan Allen, all that stuff. So CeeDee Lamb's a slam dunk for me. It's like, honestly, probably the easiest turnkey operation. You just let it run and score points. So I like his reasoning over CeeDee Lamb over Tyreek. So it's those two for me.
Yeah, mine is going to be it's between his 5th and 6th round picks, but I think Keenan Allen in the 6th round, when you kind of slot in a safe, solid wide receiver 3 on your roster, I do think that Caleb Williams is going to be good. I'm not expecting CJ Stroud level of good like that epic rookie season, but I just think that when you're Caleb Williams, Keenan Moore is going to get open. Keenan Allen is going to get open. He's going to be in the right spots. And in a PPR league, at him as my wide receiver 3 at that point, and maybe even your flex play with the way that Steve drafted getting Waddle and then Kupp, I think that is a home run there. What was your favorite pick of just how it played out in this mock?
Well, with how it played out, I think my favorite pick is Cooper Kupp. I actually agree with all of what you all said. I mean, I took all those players just to see what the team would end up looking like. But I love Cooper Kupp in the 4th round. I really do believe he could be a top 15 receiver this season with maybe top 12. I don't think he's better than top 12. But where I'm drafting him as the 24th wide receiver off the board, if I have the potential to have a top 15, I'm happy with it. I will say the only thing I really didn't love about this one, because we kind of got into that with your drafts, but not mine. Taking a quarterback in the 12th round, I do like waiting on quarterbacks. I wish I would have been a little bit ahead of the run. I would have loved to get a Brock Purdy or a Jordan Love before those guys were taken by backups. Not that I think Tua will be bad. I just, I have Brock Purdy a little higher and I have Jordan Love a little higher. So I still would have waited on quarterbacks, but maybe not as long, because having Tua and Herbert, I don't love my team as much as if I even draft a round earlier and I, miss out on Tony Pollard or someone along those lines, Blake Corum. So that's the only thing I wish I would have changed when looking at this draft. It's going around earlier on the quarterback.
All right. Well, let's get your guys' opinion on my mock draft, of course, going from number 5 in this 10-team PPR mock. What do you guys got?
So my favorite, I have 2 picks that I love on your team. The first one is Amon-Ra. I know you have the 5th pick. They play 3 games outdoors this season.
That's it.
That's it.
That's it. Yeah, I know.
Amon-Ra is going to kill it. That's why I have him as my 3rd wide receiver.
And he was playing injured all of last season, or most of it, wasn't that?
I saw that receiver show where he had hand, foot, and mouth and play the whole game and killed it. Amon-Ra's the dude, man. So for me, it's CD, Tyreek Hill, Amon-Ra. So getting him at the 5th pick, I think is great value. I also love Dalton Kincaid. I love that pick in the 5th round. Honestly, when I look at your team, I love your receivers, but I love that you got Kincaid in the 5th because you're going to have a positional advantage. I think Kincaid has Laporta upside this season. Number 1 tight end. That's who I think he could be. So I love that pick.
Mine is the run of McLaurin, Godwin, and Connor.
Oh, that's a good one.
I love those right there. I was like, oh, that's so good. I literally wanted to try to do something like that, but it couldn't shake down that way. It got a little messy, but I love that.
JJ took a bunch of my man crushes, so I I love it.
I love McLaurin, and Godwin's right there. He's out there solid. They turn in yards, and they're integral parts of their offenses. So. And then James Conner just flies under the radar like always.
I feel like, because I know we've talked about it. I've seen other fantasy people mentioning it. I don't think by a month and a half from now, when everyone's getting together to draft, I do not believe James Conner has that value. I think he is a dude that easily climbs to the 5th or 6th round by the time we get to fantasy football season, because there's just so many people talking about him, of how good a value he is. So I think we might see some people jump on that a little bit earlier.
Well, then let's hope Trey Benson has a killer
preseason,
and then James Conner will still be great value.
Yeah, because that is one guy when you just hear everyone talking about him. You're like, all right, you might lose his value a little bit when we get there. But I'm with you, Aaron. My favorite pick was Terry McLaurin in the 6th round because I'm a Jaden Daniels guy. I'm high on this rookie class of quarterbacks. I think Jaden Daniels can come in right away, be productive. Terry McLaurin, as the way I drafted, he'd be slotting in as a flex play for me with, being a number 1 target in the Commanders offense. And then the depth of having a Chris Godwin who's just solid. And you plug him in, Baker Mayfield, that offense, he's going to get his catches. Yeah, Mike Evans might have the explosive touchdowns down the field, but Chris Godwin locked in. So I like that run, but Terry McLaurin in the 6th round, I think upside and an offense. And I think McLaurin, because of it being a rookie quarterback, I think his value will stay there. And in the 5th or 6th round, if you're looking at Keenan Allen, Terry McLaurin, established playmaking wide receivers with rookie quarterbacks, I think those are going to be valuable picks there that kind of will stay in this area. And then, as we've talked about, the one thing I didn't like how it played out was really not having any depth at running back. I don't like not having at least an RB3 on my roster. I know I'm the super wide receiver guy, but I didn't like how that played out. So I think right after I took James Conner, I'd come back because I realized, after I went Jack Smith and Jigba and Jordan Love, that even all those RB2s we talked about were just gone. But I still like the wide receivers I can get late, not the running back. So that's one thing I would do. If I'm going wide receiver early, then 8th, 9th, maybe even 10th round, I'm making sure I'm getting a couple good running backs there just to have a little bit of depth.
Yeah, the running backs in that 8, 9, 10 range, I think you can get some great value and do exactly what you're talking about, right? You take James Conner, but then you could probably get a Tony Pollard or a Tajay Spears right in there, and your team probably looks 100% different.
Yeah,
because I like being able to come back with Coleman getting a bite of that rookie wide receiver apple because I'm big on Coleman. Jacoby Myers and Dubs are just those to me are like safety blankets. Like I trust them. Even having Devontae Adams on my team, if I got to a week where I had to play Jacoby as a flex, I would be okay with that because whether it's Gardner Minshew or O'Connell, we saw last year that Myers and Adams are productive. I know Brock Bowers is the new wrench in this offense, but it's again, we're talking about late round picks. And these are guys you have to be flexible on, guys that you have to understand might not be on your roster in week 3 or week 4. But yeah. And the Smith and Jigba one, he might actually be a keeper for me in one of my leagues, but he's probably the hardest guy right now for me. Because I don't know what to think of. Is he actually going to be a full-time number 2? They got a new coach in there, but it's the defensive coordinator coming over from Baltimore, who's talked up Jackson Smith and Jigba. So he's definitely a guy that's in the 9th round or later for me. But when we look at what we did, and we just discussed your draft, Aaron, but I'm going to say, looking at what you're able to do, drafting from the 10th pick, it's tough, and you have to wait on it. But I really liked what you did in the 8th round. Evan Ingram there, being able to get a tight end with huge upside, easy lock tight end, top 10 tight end, and fantasy football with the ability to be in the top 5 in an offense. I think a lot of people are expecting more consistency from this season because the pressure, the way they ended last season, because a lot of people have been pointing fingers. But I think Evan Ingram stays a constant. He's probably my favorite pick for you. What do you think of Aaron's draft, Steve?
Well, obviously Waddle, because
yeah,
that's
in the 6th
Waddle
round.
in the 6th. That's
if it was to happen, yeah.
Yeah, I would love that. I do love Evan Ingram. I agree with you. When looking at your draft, this is kind of what I was hoping would happen in that 15th round. Brock Purdy. I have Brock Purdy as like top 10 quarterback. He finished last season as number 6. Like, I know you have Jordan Love, but this would be exactly how I'd want a draft to play out, where I could steal Brock Purdy in the 15th round and load up my team like you did. So overall, like obviously, like I said, Waddle. I agree with JJ on Ingram, and I do like Xavier Worthy, but Brock Purdy that's the quarterback I've been talking about in 10-team leagues. I think that's where you can steal points because he's going to be a good quarterback again. So.
Yeah, definitely.
I like it, and I think this is a lot of fun. It definitely opened up a lot of questions in my mind that I want to address. But really, one of the biggest things is your strategy is going to be dictated by where you draft, and do a couple exercises like this. If you don't know where you're drafting, or if your league is randomized on draft day, or if you find out a couple weeks before, go. I think 1, 5, and 10 are good areas to draft from because you kind of get a sample size of each thing, and we learn some stuff. If you're drafting 10th, maybe you do want to be a little bit more hungry when it comes to grabbing running backs. If you go 1, you don't have to be locked in on Christian McCaffrey to have yourself a balanced team. And then at 5, it's got to be able to balance a little bit of everything depending on the way that your draft goes down. But when you guys are going through this and we're able to kind of see what we all did, what were some of your biggest just takeaways of Mock Draft 1.0?
The lobbies that I had drafted in that specific one, it's like, your draft, you can prepare all you want, but it always can shake down different. And that's something I want to talk about too, because there was one of my leagues, the second year Patrick Mahomes, somebody drafted him as like the 5th pick in the 1st round, and everyone laughed at him, and he just went absolute bananas. And it was something that I never thought would happen in a draft. I never thought it would shake out the way it did, but he drafted literally the top quarterback, 6-point touchdown league, throwing a ton of touchdowns. It was just insane for him. So it's like, however your draft board, breaks down, drops down to you, it's like you just got to be able to adapt. That's really what it is, and hope at the end you're comfortable with your team, because hindsight, it's always 2020 on this stuff. So we're reading back in it. So it's like in the moment, it is tough. And for, people going through the drafts, it just do the best you can.
I mean, to kind of emphasize Aaron's point, I think the biggest thing is when you're in a draft, a lot of times we kind of get lost at looking at the players and we forget to look at our roster, right? So I've always said, there's apps out there, and I'll, not non-sponsored, I'll recommend some in the next couple weeks. But I think the biggest thing is have something that shows you what your breakdown is. So know what your league settings are, right? We play in a 3 wide receiver, 1 flex. So I know 4 wide receivers can start on my team. But if I don't have any running backs and I have 6 wide receivers, like I've hurt myself more than I've done anything else. So you kind of need to be aware of what it is. So write it down if you have to, get an app, whatever you need to, but be aware of what your team's looking like, not just what the board says and not just who's available. And it takes an extra second, but you have that time to breathe. Take the clock if you need to. So that's kind of what I did in this one. I breathed. I was just looking at it going, okay, who do I still have? Right. That's why I took that little run of running backs in that middle, because I was like, got 5 or 4 good receivers. Let's get some good depth on running backs here. So especially when that player, Patrick Mahomes, gets taken in the first round, because that's going to happen. We didn't see any quarterbacks go in our first 2 rounds. I guarantee you that's going to happen in a home draft. Somebody's going to take Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson in the first 2 rounds, and it's going to throw you off a little bit.
I mean, yeah, we've all experienced that in the balls and chains league, kind of the awkwardness of drafting in there. So it's like, it does happen.
Balls and chains are significant other fantasy football league, which you throw in, a group of players that are not watching the fantasy football show or not doing mock drafts, and you have some of those curveballs. But I think you guys made some really good points on this, and I'm thinking, what do you think? Maybe the last week of August, mock draft 2.0 to really get people ready for their draft.
Going to want to steal our show or our picks right before our draft.
Yes. Well, I think the challenge is going to be the amount of crossover that we've had in our mock drafts, and when we're going head to head in our league, because we're trying to chase down the champion, Enron over here. It's we know the players we want and the players we like, and then pulling the trigger on them at the right time.
Well, and here soon, I think I don't even know, August 1st, we're going to find out our draft positions. I give us a month out, so we'll have an opportunity to actually do a mock draft from our actual draft spots if we need to. And I mean, we could see the difference.
That would be crazy.
But that's a good thing. If you can find out, if you know where your drafts from, do a couple of these. We use Fantasy Pros for this exercise. I like a lot of the things, the features that they have, but there's apps you can do it all over. You can do it on Yahoo, you can do it on
there's a ton of apps out there, and mock drafts are great. The only problem you ever run into is people quitting out, so you end up with auto picks. That doesn't matter. Like, auto picks are important. People are going to do stupid stuff, and just use that as an attention.
Yeah, and what I was okay with is I even did one against the computer, because a lot of times people do kind of default to the rankings.
Mm-hmm.
Like in the moment, what you guys have touched on, just being in there, we obviously have, if you're watching us talk about fantasy football, we're all crazy because we talk about it at a different level. But even there's people that
in July.
Yeah, there's people that are in your league that you've played fantasy football with for 10 years that default to the rankings. Like, and so you get that vibe. And that's
people in our league who bring an ESPN cheat sheet. Like, they're going to use those rankings. So
so they're good exercises to get an experience of what it's going to be like when you get into your fantasy football drafts. So I think I'm looking forward to seeing what happens in training camp, reacting to those things, the stories that come out, and about a month from now, do mock draft 2.0 for the fantasy football show and see what changes, or even see if our man crushes go a little bit higher in the drafts.
I hope not. That's why they're man crushes.
It'll be interesting. See where things shake down.
But it was great stuff. Don't forget, you can follow us. We're everywhere. We're on the X now. See that?
We are on the Twitter or the X.
The X, sending tweets out on the X. 3 Dudes FFS. Of course, they're going to be dropping a lot of content. And then, of course, the Instagram 3 Dudes Fantasy Football Show. I know it's a lot to type in, but type it in. Give us a follow over there. Posting reels from our episodes, other content too when big news breaks in the NFL. And here we go. It was fun. 1 down, and who knows how many more to go in the mock draft world.
So many.
So
Right.
many.
You gentlemen, you have fun. Get those college football dynasties started because EA Sports College Football 25 is out. Start your road to glory and then make your way into Madden. But until next time, gentlemen, it's been fun.
Peace.
Oh, yeah.